Ever been on a river cruise? Pretty chill, right? Now imagine that river is the Congo in Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness. Suddenly, chill turns creepy. You're not just cruising, you're sailing into the heart of colonial exploitation and deeply ingrained racism. Conrad's book, while a classic, is super messed up. It paints Africa as this dark, savage continent and its people as barely human. This isn't just about bad geography, it's about how European colonialism used stories like Heart of Darkness to justify their own brutality. This book sparked a huge debate. Is it a critique of colonialism or just straight up racist? We're diving deep into that, especially through the lens of Chinua Achebe, a literary giant who called Conrad out. Buckle up because we're about to navigate some seriously choppy waters. Chinua Achebe, the highly respected figure in African literature, was unafraid to call out nonsense and lies, especially regarding the Western portrayal of Africa. He famously criticized Heart of Darkness as racist, and his critique is essential reading. Achebe's main argument: Conrad's depiction of Africa as a dark and uncivilized place was not only inaccurate, it was profoundly dangerous. This critique extended beyond a single book. It addressed how such narratives contributed to a system of racism that justified colonialism and its associated atrocities. Achebe contended that Conrad dehumanized Africans, reducing them to mere props in a narrative centered on the issues of white individuals. Ouch. He did not claim that Conrad intentionally set out to write a racist book. Rather, he argued that Conrad's unconscious biases, shaped by the colonial context of his time, permeated his writing, rendering Heart of Darkness a tool of oppression. Okay, let's get into the nitty-gritty. Achebe wasn't just throwing around accusations, he pointed to specific examples in Conrad's writing that reek of racism. One big one is Conrad's use of language. Remember, words have power. When Conrad constantly describes Africa using terms like darkness, savage, and primitive, it creates a stark contrast with Europe, which is implicitly portrayed as civilized, enlightened, and good. Not cool, Conrad. And then there's how Conrad describes African characters. They're often nameless, faceless, and lacking any real personality. They're there to serve the plot of the white protagonist Marlowe, not to be complex human beings with their own stories. Now, some folks try to defend Conrad by saying, hey, it's just Marlowe's point of view. Conrad wasn't racist, he was just showing us how racist Marlowe was. Yeah, about that. Achebe saw right through that argument. He pointed out that even if we're supposed to be critical of Marlowe, Conrad never really offers an alternative perspective. The narrative never truly challenges Marlowe's racist views. It just presents them as fact. Plus, let's not forget that Heart of Darkness was hugely influential and often praised for its realistic portrayal of Africa. So even if Conrad was trying to be subversive, his message got totally lost in translation, reinforcing harmful stereotypes instead of challenging them. Section 5. The Legacy of Literary Racism. Here's the thing, Heart of Darkness isn't some isolated incident. It's part of a much larger problem of how Western literature has often depicted non-European cultures as exotic, dangerous, and inferior. Think about it. How many books, movies, and TV shows rely on tired stereotypes about people of color? How often are these cultures seen through a white Western lens, their voices silenced and their stories untold? This kind of literary racism matters. It shapes how we see the world, how we understand history, and how we treat each other. When we allow these harmful representations to go unchallenged, we're complicit in perpetuating the very systems of oppression that Achebe dedicated his life to dismantling. Section 6. Beyond the page. The real-world consequences of stereotypes. Okay, so we've established that books aren't just harmless stories. They can have real-world consequences. And the stereotypes perpetuated by books like Heart of Darkness have had devastating impacts on how the West views Africa. Think about it. When people imagine Africa, what do they see? Often it's images of poverty, war, and disease. Images that are directly linked to the kind of darkest African narrative that Conrad helped to popularize. These stereotypes make it harder for people to understand the complexities of Africa, to see its diversity, its richness, its beauty. They also make it easier to justify policies and actions that harm African people, from foreign aid that perpetuates dependency to military interventions that destabilize entire regions. Section 7. The power of language shaping perceptions and igniting change. Let's be real, language isn't neutral. The words we use have power. They can be used to uplift, to inspire, to create understanding. But they can also be used to denigrate, to dehumanize, to justify oppression. Conrad's language in Heart of Darkness is a prime example of how words can be weaponized. By consistently using terms like darkness and savage to describe Africa and its people, he reinforced a narrative of European superiority and African inferiority. But just as language can be used to harm, it can also be used to heal. By challenging racist language, by reclaiming our narratives, and by telling our own stories, we can begin to dismantle the systems of oppression that have silenced marginalized voices for far too long. Section 8. Confronting our literary heritage. Look, no one's saying we should ban Heart of Darkness or pretend it doesn't exist. What we need to do is engage with it critically. We need to teach it within its historical context, acknowledging its problematic aspects while also recognizing its literary significance. More importantly, we need to diversify our bookshelves. We need to read more books by authors from Africa, Asia, Latin America, authors whose voices have been historically marginalized. We need to listen to their stories, to learn from their perspectives, and to challenge our own biases. Confronting our literary heritage isn't about erasing history, it's about understanding it more fully. It's about recognizing the ways in which power and privilege have shaped our understanding of the world, and it's about actively working to create a more just and equitable future. Section 9. A call to action. Dismantling racism in literature and beyond. So, where do we go from here? We can't just talk about these issues. We need to take action. Dismantling racism in literature and beyond requires a collective effort, and it starts with each and every one of us. Here's the deal. Read critically. Challenge stereotypes. Support writers of color. Demand more diverse and inclusive narratives. Educate yourself and others about the history of colonialism and its ongoing legacy. This isn't just about books. It's about creating a more just and equitable world for everyone. It's about recognizing that we're all connected and that our liberation is bound up with one another's. Let's draw inspiration from Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart, which portrays colonialism from the Igbo perspective. Remember Wole Soyinka, the Nigerian author who won the Nobel Prize in 1986. Reflect on Buchi Emecheta's Second-Class Citizen, where she describes her life in London. And consider Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, a major global literary figure addressing feminism and post-colonial Nigeria. So let's get to work.